And we thank God for this opportunity God has granted us for us to share the word of God around the issue of understanding the Old Testament. And we said last week that we'll be taking the wisdom books to discuss them one by one. Now, the reason is because we said the wisdom books, they are talking about the multi-sided wisdom of God, or the glory of God that is multi-sided. And so each book is almost like unique, almost like it is standalone. That is why we'll take each of the book and discuss it. Now, we'll start today with Job. Now, when you look at Job, Job looks like a unique book, and it has been, Job is one of the books that have been agreed among scholars as one of the oldest book of the Old Testament. And the reason is because of two reasons. One is because of the timeline in which Job was written. And the second thing is the person that the book is discussing and what the book intends to share. Now, these two facts makes Job one of the oldest book of the Old Testament. Now, what is it about the person that the book was talking about? Job in particular, he is a person that the book talked about, existed within a timeline. Now, I will say this, that there's a particular thing about the book of Job that is omitted, and that gives it it actually complicates the context or the timeline in which you are supposed to look at the book, and also the origin of the person that they are talking about, and that is a small a problem. It was omitted in the book of Job. It is actually part of the New Greek translation of the Old Testament. When the Old Testament was translated from Hebrew to Greek, that was used in the days of Jesus, called the Septuagint. This book had a footnote, and that footnote at the end of the book of Job tell us the origin of Job. Actually, Job is the short form of the word Jobab. Jobab was actually the person that the book was talking about. And now Jobab from origin is the king. He was a king of Edom. He was a king of Edom. That's to tell you that Job was a descendant of Esau. So Job was an Edomite. He was a king of Edom. In fact, his story, this is collaborated with other parts of if you see it that way, then it is collaborated with other verses in the Old Testament, where it is said that during the time that the children of Israel were in captivity, or they were in Israel, there were kings in Edom. And then he begins to tell you of the first king called Bela, and then the second king called Jobab. So Jobab was the second king. So the book of Job is about Jobab, the second king of Edom. Now it is collaborated, like I said, in Genesis. You will find it in Genesis chapter 36, verse 31 to 34, and in Chronicles, First Chronicles chapter 1, verse 43 to 44. These verses tell us who Jobab is. Now, Jobab is actually the full word. So in this footnote of the book of Job that is in the Septuagint, it tells us who this book was talking about. Now, I want us to see it that way so that we'll understand the timeline. This book was written in the timeline when the children of Israel were in captivity. Job existed when the children of Israel were in captivity in the 400 years that they were in Egypt. That was the time that this man existed, and he was actually a king. Now, I will tell you that the reason why he is a king is clearly seen in the way his wealth was described. If you read it, you will notice that what is talked about in terms of his wealth was a wealth that was fit for a king. You will see those descriptions also given about Solomon. When Solomon was king, they tell you about his cattle, they tell you about his wealth, his livestock that he possessed. Now, that is the same thing with Jobab, and it is common for people that were in authority, kings in their time, to accumulate also, or to quantify his wealth, this glory. Now, this man existed during the glory of the Edomite kings. This man existed during the time that the Edomite kings were at the height of their power, or we say in the golden age of Edom. Now, this golden age of Edom is the timeline in which Job existed. Now, you will notice that the people that Job also discussed with, all the people, they were actually bearing Edomite names. All the people that are called the friends of Job, they're actually Edomite, because the names that they are bearing, it is related to people or to lands that are in Edom. For example, one of them is called somebody from Temanite. Temanite is a place in Edom. And then they said, the book also said that there lived a man in the land of Uz named Job. Now that's Job Uz is another word for Edom, and you will find it in Lamentation chapter 4, verse 24. Lamentation chapter 4 called directly Uz as Edom. So they were telling you of this was a man that lived in Edom during the height of their power. Certain things happened to them, and within that context, there was something about God that was revealed. Now, the context in which I'm raising this thing is for you to understand what was the thing that made God to come in that kind of glory, to reveal himself in that kind of glory. Job is the continuation or the zenith or the height of the dispensation of conscience. Before God would start the dispensation of the law in Moses, he had already reached a point where the dispensation of conscience was at the height of his peak. Now, the dispensation of conscience is the timeline of Abraham, whereby there was no law, but there were people could be said to be righteous, were based on the dictates of their conscience. And so Job, the basis for the righteousness of Job was his conscience, because it is not said that there was any form of law that they had. Now you notice that even the time of Jacob, when Jacob was in Canaan, you notice when Joseph was sold into slavery. Remember that he refused to sleep with Potiphar's wife because he said that was a sin against God. Now, there was nothing written, but what was it? They were existing during the dispensation of the conscience. Now, this was a civilization that advanced. And in their advancement, you would see that this was a land that was both prosperous and righteous. And they were actually committed to the God of heaven. It is not reported in the book of Job that they were worshiping idols. That's to tell you that what God had started in Abraham continued. It didn't actually end in Esau. It did not gradually end in Esau. It has graduated and become something powerful, while God was still raising the children of Israel through Jacob in the land of Egypt. Now, also say this, that if you look at the timeline of Job, also that it is actually around the matter of the glory that was existing during the time of the reign of the Edomites before there was king in Israel. You will notice that the kingship of Edom did not start as men being kings. It started that there were chiefs in Edom. Then Bela became the first king. Then 8 kings, and there were 8 kings. Then there were chiefs in Edom again. That's to tell you that during those kings in Edom, that was the height of their power. They rose to power, and then it became an established kingdom. And then after a while, the kingdom fell. During the time the children of Israel came back after captivity, Edom had already fallen, because they didn't tell us that what the children of Israel were encountering were kings. They said they were the chiefs of Edom. So that's to tell you that that kingdom had existed for a span of 400 years and has declined. Now, before this kingdom declined, at the height of his power, something happened. And that is what is captured in the book of Job. It is not just their civilization and what they knew about God, but what was God, what was the glory of God at the height of this civilization. Because I've already said it here, that the wisdom books are books that capture the glory of God within a timeline. And this glory that it is capturing, mostly God reveals himself within the prosperity of the nations. In the prosperity of these nations were the shadow that served as the means by which the glory of God was revealed. So it is not different from what was happening to the Edomites, and it became a basis for which the glory of God was revealed. Now, I will say this, that this is also the point where the dispensation of the conscience finished and the glory of God came at its peak. When you see the next thing, the next place that God will show up will be in Mount Sinai. Now, there are verses that capture that the way God appeared to Job was the way he appeared to Job was the same way he appeared on Mount Sinai. For example, in Job chapter 38, when God finally showed up, he said he showed up in a whirlwind. And then in Deuteronomy, when Moses was talking about the glory of God that came to Sinai, he mentioned that before God will come to Sinai, in Deuteronomy chapter 33 verse 2, he had first appeared in Seir. That is, he appeared in Edom before he appeared on Mount Sinai. And then in Judges chapter 5 verse 4 to 5, when Deborah was singing, she talked about the glory of God that first appeared in Seir. God appeared in Seir, and then the mountains there skipped. God appeared in Seir in glory, and the mountains responded the same way he appeared on Mount Sinai. Now, the message of him appearing on Mount Sinai or Mount Seir during the days of Job was to reveal his glory. When he appeared on Mount Sinai, he did not reveal his glory, he revealed the law. So that is the two things. That's why you will notice that what he did on Mount Seir, he did not do it on Mount Sinai. It was a different experience. That's why when he came to Moses, he said, God, he was known by their ancestors with this name, but he will be known to Moses by a different identity. He will be revealing himself, giving him a different revelation. Now, this I'm telling you so that you understand the context and the timeline and the space. That is why it is adequate to say that the book of Job is actually the oldest book. It existed before Moses would pen Genesis. That is, at the height of their civilization, they wrote the book. Now, the uniqueness in which the book was written is this. There is a deflection from the man. The man is not the focus. That is why his wealth and his prestige was not described. Rather, they gave a simple description of him as just a man. They said there was just a man that lived in the land of Uz. The reason was to deflect from him because he is not the center of discussion. It is what he experienced that mattered. And so it is to take you from who he is to what he experienced. And what did he experience? He experienced God. And that is what the book is trying to capture. Not to capture the life of Job or to capture the history of Job. That's why even if you will not, this what I've just shared, you are not something you're familiar with. Actually, the book is not about Job. It is actually what Job experienced. And that is God is at the center of what Job experienced. Now, I will tell you something you will notice in the book of Job, and I'll describe it here, is this. You will notice that there are certain things that, certain issues were raised in the book of Job. Yet, God, they remain unanswered. The first thing that was raised in the book of Job was that it started with Satan coming in and then raising some concerns. What he raised in the book of Job, in the things he raised, he started a process. But what he raised and he himself was not a matter. His matter was not discussed during the book as the book progressed. That is the matter of Satan that he rose, the concerns he raised at the beginning of the book. It was not answered through the process of the book and even towards the end of the book. So that one is not the focus of the book. So the concerns of Satan is not the focus of the book. Secondly, the concerns and the things that his friends raised, it is not also answered. The things that the friends of Job raised, it is not also answered. Towards the end of the book, when God showed up, God did not answer them. Rather, he summarized all that they had said about him as if they did not know what they were saying. Now, that is something. The third observation you will see also in the book of Job is that the concerns that Job himself raised were also not answered. God did not directly answer the concerns of Job. When God showed up, by him raising the concerns he was raising, God did not come to him and begin to answer him and tell him that these are the reasons why you're raising these things and these are the answers. God did not answer him directly. Rather, God, when he showed up, he told Job that, let me speak to you as a man. He said, who is he that darkened my counsel without knowledge? Stand up as a man, let me speak to you. And then God began to tell him that he didn't actually know what he was talking about. Now, what is it? It's trying to tell you that the book is not trying to give us simple or direct answers to the matters of life. It is not a book that is trying to answer our concerns. It is not addressing our concerns. It is rather going beyond our concerns. And what is it? It's trying to raise that when you are in the realm of the glory of God, it is beyond the matters that we face as human beings. It's beyond our concerns as men. When we are talking about the glory of God, it is beyond our concerns as men. It is beyond the things that we pass through. It's beyond the physical issues that we are passing through. And that is what the book of Job is bringing to us. That when you are entering the realm of the glory of God, or the matter of the glory of God, it is beyond our human concerns. You know, sometimes we will have the concerns of why do people suffer? Job started as if it was trying to answer the matter of the suffering of man. But at the end of the day, no any simple answer was given about the sufferings of men. Rather, God revealed himself and said, I am more than the things you are passing through. I am more than the things you are passing through. we know the matter of what Satan is doing. It started as if this was something God was like trying to share light on what Satan is doing in order to inflict pain and inflict things on the sons of men. But at the end of the day, no any explanation. God did not show up and explain to Job that Satan was the reason why he had been attacked. Rather, God discussed his glory. God talked about his own greatness. Now, that's to tell you that the matter of the greatness or the glory of God that we have been called to share in is beyond any other thing that we will pass through as men. And so it now becomes the hope of the believer. It becomes the hope of the children of God. Now, we're saying, what I'm raising here is this: what do a Christian stand to gain for him to believe in God? Even if all our prayers are not answered, do we still have something to gain in God? That is what Job answered. God is saying that there's more in me than your problems. There is more in me than the challenges that you'll be facing in this life. And so when you are having me, you are having much more than solution to your problems. You are having much more solution to the challenges of life that you are passing through. You would see that there was the issue of God was raising them beyond your pain and beyond the challenges you are passing through and beyond the prosperity that you expect me to bring. It is possible that, we believed God when we were saved. We wanted God to help us in the issues of life. And then sometimes would be as if they are not forthcoming. And you wonder, is there still something to gain in following the Lord? I want you to understand that having God, what you stand to gain in Christ Jesus, is much more than God answering all your prayers. It is much more than God meeting all your needs. What you stand to gain in God is his glory. And so God appeared to Job to tell him that I did not come to your life. I did not walk in your life just to be your rear guide. I was not around you so that to be your fence, to protect you, and then to keep you safe. I did not come around you to become your righteousness, because that matter had been shattered. It has been shattered. When God appeared, he did not tell him, I'm not there, because the query of his friends was that evil had happened to him because he has lost something. It was because something was wrong with his righteousness. God was saying that it is not about your right. I'm not there just to make you righteous. There is more to me. And what is it? I am in your life so that you will experience me. I'm in your life so that you experience me. And when you are experiencing me, is far much more than having righteousness. Is far much more than the trials that you will pass through. Is far much more than the things you will pass through as a person. And so this idea, this thing, this glory of God is far much more, and this is the gain of the believer. This is our gain. This is what we stand to gain. And since this is what we stand to gain, this is our hope. This is our future. There are believers that will pass through difficult things. They will pass through incurable diseases. And this incurable disease can even lead to their death. And then he said, all these years that they have served the Lord, what did they stand to gain? I want you to understand that there is more to God than what they passed through. And that is clearly brought to us in Job. God did not answer the question that this is it, but he went on to say that beyond your questions, I am more than your questions. I am more than enough. I am more than your questions. If you experience me, it dwarfs, it is much more than the things that you are passing as a person. That is why in the New Testament, this glory in a shadow form in Job is clearly stated in Romans, where Paul said in Romans chapter 8, verse 18 to 19, where Paul raised when he was saying, so he said, the sufferings of this world, he said, the sufferings of this world cannot be compared with the glory that will be revealed in us. And so he said, we are the sons of God. He said we are, and the earth is waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God. He said the glory that is going to be revealed in us, the sufferings we are passing through, that glory is beyond it. So if there are challenges we are passing through as believers, the book of Job is trying to bring to us that beyond your pain, there is glory. And so your hope is supposed to help keep your hope alive. What you stand to gain in Christ is beyond it. That is why some believers did not see it as them losing out, even when they were killed for Christ. They didn't see as if they were losing out, because it is not only that heaven was promised to them when they died, but that God had promised that he will fill them with himself. He had promised that he is their inheritance. He had promised that they will experience him fully. They will come into his glory.